Now, this next panel I am super excited about. We have the most brilliant set of speakers. We'll be talking about how we are already moving from 10 years on from the Paris Agreement, from climate commitments to climate competitiveness. So let me welcome all the speakers to the stage. Louise Rebender, Exponential Roadmap, you'll introduce the rest of the panel. Thank you.
So everyone can come onto the stage. I don't like being here alone. Great to see you. And we really have a fantastic panel here today, and I'll just be starting.
Oh, it's too shy.
Everyone. All right. I will start with a little bit of a monologue as an introduction as people are sitting down, and that is that we know that climate impacts, they intensify. We experience this ourselves, and maybe I should stop there, but we also see it in the news every day. We're now in 2025, that's the third round of National Determined Contributions, NDCs, and we have quite a massive way to go. And a lot of changes and progressive work is needed, and as Johan Rockström points to, the 1.5 degrees Celsius, that is a non-negotiable target. But changes and challenges, it also means opportunities. And at Solutions House, as you will see in this session, and as Lucy talked about, we're focusing on answers only. We bring together leaders from cross sectors to explore how companies are turning national climate commitments to catalysts for innovation, resilience, and long-term positive growth. My name is Louise Rebender. I'm director at Exponential Roadmap Initiative. And I will be moderating this session, and I'm honored to be here. The session we call From Climate Commitments to Competitive Advantage, and we have it here at Solutions House of London Climate Action Week 2025. So, that was the start. We will have these panelists guide us through financial resilience, leadership solutions, and policy. And we have with us Rebecca Marmot, Chief Sustainability and Corporate Affairs Officer at Unilever. Welcome. Lena Julle, Chief Sustainability Officer, Inter-IKEA Group. David Saddington, Head of International Climate Strategy, COP Engagement and Governance for UK Government Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. That's the longest title that we have here today. We have Tom Taylor, Head of International Sustainability Advocacy Policy at Viva. And Marcelo Behar, COP30 Special Envoy for Bioeconomy. And Gonzalo Munoz, Global Ambassador for Race to Zero and Race to Resilient High-Level Champion COP 2025. Welcome, all of you. Great to have you here. And we will start really quickly now because we have David, you need to leave quite soon. So we'll start with a question for you. And it is about NDCs, and I like to clarify things. NDCs, nationally determined contributions, we also can call it climate country targets and plans, to make it really simple. But how are governments ensuring that nationally determined contributions are not only ambitious on paper, but also backed by enforceable mechanisms and incentives that align with private sector innovation and investment timelines?
Thanks so much, Louise, and yeah, pleasure to be here. And my apologies, I do need to dash out on the hour because I am briefing the Secretary of State on his programme for London Climate Action Week and what's sort of coming up in the next few days, which is very, very exciting because we actually, you might have heard some of the numbers around this. Is the largest climate week ever, and my goodness, sort of in the UK government, we've been working sort of really hard to field our sort of ministers in this space, and ministers and the special representatives on climate and nature are doing over 120 events now, which is quite sort of staggering. So we've got a good job there, but we've got a huge amount of ambassadors sort of out in the field talking about this. But to your question around these mythical sort of NDCs, these national climate change plans. First of all, just to underscore the UK's one. The Prime Minister announced it at COP29, and that is at least an 81% reduction in all greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. 81%, which is pretty extraordinary when you think on what that means in terms of a transformation we need to do in the next 10 years. All of you in this room sort of have some connection in climate in some way, shape or form, I imagine, and you can appreciate sort of, what that number means in terms of where we need to strip carbon out of the fashion industry, transport, the finance system. Everything really needs to change. And what we found is sort of when we release that plan is actually, before I get on to talking around some of the enforceable mechanisms, is first of all, actually, there does need to be that vision and that confidence and that excitement. And my goodness, sort of the reaction we've had, the markets are quite excited about this. London is really the green finance capital of the world, and they have really embraced this NDC. They are inspired, they're emboldened by this challenge, and that's really great to see that we're on this journey with us. Say it quietly sort of thing, but I'd like to sort of for a few more to maybe sort of say that publicly at the moment as well, because it's a very sort of challenging time, we know, geopolitically, and this is really the time where we need more and more leaders to be confident and sort of saying that green growth is good, and actually sort of we do want more countries to step forward with these NDCs. So I'd say first of all, actually just being sort of being bold, having that ambition is really, really critical, and I think sort of the UK's announcement has really sort of gathered that, so we look forward to sort of seeing many other countries come forward before we get to COP30 with their climate plans. But in terms of enforceability, it's absolutely right, because of course that vision only sort of holds if it is believable. And I think this is another example where sort of in the UK we have got a lot of these things right. It has been through a process of learning, but the two things I would sort of point to is first of all the Climate Change Committee, which some of you might be familiar with, but we haven't just set these long-term targets at COPs. We've actually sort of broken these down into 5-year carbon budgets, and we have this sort of within legislative in our sort of legislation to actually sort of have these 5-year carbon budgets with a committee on climate change, which is helping us keep on track with those budgets. And then we've also taken a similar system of thinking around how do we really sort of have this enforceability, this transparency into some mechanisms, particularly in the finance sector. So we've got a transition plan task force, we've got the TCFD, lots of acronyms here, but this is part of an entire ecosystem now of voluntary disclosures, which are moving into sort of legislative requirements for organisations. And I think, when you have this cacophony of elements which are sort of working towards that high ambition of the NDC, that ultimate sort of 81% reduction, but you have sort of sector by sector, you have these policies in place and these various pushes and pulls working in harmony. That's what I think really gives the private sector confidence that this is a policy which, we are here for the long haul, it's not going away. And then we get into this really exciting ambition loop, which I'm sure Gonzalo will talk a huge amount about, but we get into this really exciting ambition loop where the private sector then pushes us to go even further and faster, and we do, and that's ultimately why we got to this NDC, because it was, the businesses from COP26, and we held that in Glasgow, were saying, we want to move further and faster, and we said, okay, we hear you, let's up this to 81%, here we are, and now we need that ambition cycle now to come back again to help us move forward into that next chapter.
Thank you so much. I think you need to leave in a few seconds, so I think I'll hold on that follow-up question. And thank you so much, and well done with the London Climate Week. It's so exciting with a massive event that we have this year. Should I hold with that? Any follow-up? Yeah, okay, thank you so much. And you can sneak out of here when you like, and you can come back as well when you like. All right, so, okay, applaud for David here. So I will go over to Gonzalo. Given the recent geopolitical tensions, the latest climate science, and the outcomes of COP28 and 29, how will COP30 carve out space for climate solutions to scale, do you think?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for Unilever for receiving us here. And I mean, it's hard to answer that question without recognizing what is happening outside, right? I'm saying these days that kind of feel sometimes like the orchestra in the Titanic. You know, it's like we're in this amazing bubble. We know that this is what we need to do. We don't know, hopefully, if the ship is sinking or not, but it's like terrible. And I'm referring to that because, I mean, that's the geopolitical scenario, and a geopolitical scenario that has been built for a while, and where COP30 in Brazil plays an incredible role on sustaining multilateralism first, right? So that's first on stake. It's really important for all of us to recognize the importance of not only the countries, like the parties, to sustain that. It's the whole of the society that has to commit to having that unique space where we can coordinate global problems that affects us all, right? So I think that that's the first element that is in place. In that case, I'm really happy of how Brazilian presidency is setting the scene, and of course Marcelo will speak a little more about it in detail. But in general, we see the type of leadership that is required at this right moment. Then when it comes to how that is already affecting the real economy, of course we have been seeing an incredible movement from, I don't know if you ever check the leaders that were signing the Paris agreements and the leaders that we have today. It's quite impressive, like who was there and who is now, let's say, ruling the world, like kind of two different worlds. But also because how sometimes the leadership of the climate environment has shifted from, let's say, mostly Europe and the US to now China. Let's say the world is getting decarbonized somehow in many ways due to the ball having passed from the US to China, and not only in this Trump administration, but even in the previous one. And I can tell you, coming from a country like Chile, developing country, we have embraced decarbonization thanks to the Chinese technology and how that is allowing us to ramp up very fast. We are seeing now, and sometimes speak about how you can see the UK in the past being the Brexit country, now the country that is leading regarding the climate policies. Is a great example of what other countries should follow in terms of policy. Not easy, confronting all the tensions that are not only in the UK, in my country, in Brazil, and other countries are also happening the same, but it's really clear on setting the trajectory and setting like the path towards the decarbonization. And then I'm very also surprised about countries like the United Arab Emirates, that are a great example of how a country that was recognized as a petro-state is shifting towards leading on renewable and really trespassing a lot of paradigms that we thought were impossible. In my country, and let me refer to a very concrete example, it came to a moment, and I'm privileged that in Chile we don't have the politicization of climate. Right? It's a state policy from the last 6-7 governments, where it's right or left or whatever. They know that this is important. And when we were hosting COP that year, there was a huge decision in Chile for phasing out coal. And it was really hard because we are not a fossil fuel country, and we had to import a lot, so we had a lot of dependency on that energy. And the definition was absolutely not clear in terms of what was going to be the future for the country. And we reached an agreement in 2019, following also countries like the UK. In that moment, there were many joining the phase off fossil fuels or the Fast Power and Coal Alliance. And for us, the definition of 2040 was really hard to define. And we had strong fights in the cabinet on how to take that decision. And finally, there was an agreement coming from the private sector for major electricity producers. They reached an agreement with the unions and with the government and the society at large to close every single coal power plant in Chile by 2040. I remember the anecdote. I was there in the president's office, and I was telling President Piñera, who passed away, was a businessman. So I told him, like, President, no one sells a shirt by $10. You sell it by $9.99, right? It's cognitively the decade before when it comes to 2039 instead of 2040, but it's also not the same. And I remember the Minister of Energy, she would have jumped over the table to kill me in that moment, because it was really hard for her to decide 2040. If you ask, not only today, that was 6 years ago, if you ask even 3 years ago, everyone in Chile, they would tell you every coal power plant will be closed no longer than 2030. So in 3 years, the technology with the political will accelerated the transition incredibly, and that is allowing Santiago to be the country, the city in the world outside of China with more electric buses. The acceleration of the electrification of everything in Chile, mining sector, agriculture, forestry, everything is getting electrified with renewable energy. We're now in the way to produce even 70 times more renewable energy than what we need in the best scenario. All of that was absolutely impossible to imagine, let's say 3-4 years ago, and that again is thanks to the political will, definitely, thanks to the technology and the entrepreneurship capacity, but thanks to the leadership of China. It's quite impressive if you watch again what was the world like 10 years ago in the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, there are massive changes, and it's just good to look back sometimes at what it was at that point when you're looking at what you have today.
Yep.
And what you have to do with. I want to go over to you, Tom. Now we're going over to finance, and how are you evaluating climate risk and opportunity in relation to NDCs and wider government plans when making investment decisions now compared to before? So a bit of a historic perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Gonzalo just said the combination of technology and political will. And the other thing you need is the money, right? So it's a nice kind of transition to come to finance next, and I think again, reflecting on what we just heard from Gonzalo, important to understand just how fast sectoral change happens. You follow this S-curve pattern where you have slow, really quick, and from an investment point of view, but equally from a lending or underwriting point of view in finance. You want to be in before you hit the exponential phase, and if you are not ready for the exponential phase, it's really hard to catch up. So it's become this new additional part of doing really robust financial analysis to understand how and when these changes are going to happen. And what we recognize is ultimately, because of, as you said, planetary boundaries, the idea that we have physical limits beyond which we lose control of whether we can, however fast we act, whether we can control the change we condemn ourselves to. Those things mean that there are imperatives that have to happen. So understanding when they're going to happen has become an important forward-looking part of how you do robust finance. So it's important to understand that when you're looking at where you're going to find profit and therefore returns, where you want to deploy capital that ultimately is not ours, it's our customers' money, you have to understand what the legal, regulatory, policy environment is going to be, because that's what shapes what makes money. And that's why, adding to what we heard from David, so the top-level ambition, that vision, the necessary thing is that national plans are underpinned by implementing policy that gives confidence to the market, gives confidence to business that actually governments are going to follow through with what they say. And one of the incredible things 10 years on from Paris is that the brilliance of the authors of that agreement, they built it all in. Everything we need to do is in the agreement. So NDCs are on a ratchet, ever increasing ambition. And whilst this is a critical year for countries to submit their 2035 plans, there's no barrier to a country saying, actually, things are going faster. We heard about the ambition loop. We've seen that our private sector has allowed us more space. We can up our ambition. So recognizing that whilst there is a formal process, a country can submit a more ambitious NDC at any time, and we should be pushing for countries to keep sharpening their pencil. But from our point of view, it's when you get not only from that top-level vision, and we do welcome what the UK has done in its target, and others who've submitted ambitious plans already, and look forward to seeing them from other countries. But recognizing this isn't a one-year thing, this is an ongoing process. So Paris is this process of continuous improvement, and we need to continue moving forward even when there are challenges. So the underlying policy is important, and that's built in. NDCs have to be backed by policy to give confidence in their implementation. That's in Article 4 of the Paris Agreement. And in this round of NDCs, there's another element of Paris that kicks in, which is that the NDCs have to be informed by what we agreed in Dubai in the global stocktake. And actually, the stocktake, again, is this incredible piece of multilateral agreement where almost everything we need to do to fundamentally reshape the global economy in favour of the transition is in that agreement. So huge changes to the way that 75% of emissions are generated from energy, written in there. We need to triple renewables, double energy efficiency, phase out fossil fuels, phase out subsidies, increase clean transport. It's all there. Everyone signed up to do it. And NDCs are supposed to reflect that. And so we need to push governments to put that into their NDCs, and that will change where money flows incredibly fast when those things are put in place. Finance will not wait for those policies to actually be implemented. When we have certainty that governments will follow through, money will start to flow. We'll hit that exponential phase of the transition. I think when we see those policies change, that's when we will see where financial markets put their money change. There is a huge correlation between current policies and the analysis of the sort of warming trajectory of markets. They basically both say somewhere between 2.7 and 3 degrees. And if we put in place increased ambition of policy, we will see where money gets deployed shifting to align with that. So it's this positive feedback loop, the ambition loop, that, as we heard it, you've almost got what we've described as this triple helix, where you have governments being ambitious, you have business being ambitious, but you also need finance being ambitious. Mm-hmm. So as financial actors, we need to, along with our business colleagues, collaborate with government, but also we all need to be pushing each other, even in challenging times, to be as ambitious as we can, because we know the challenges will only get greater if we don't accelerate.
Mm. Thank you so much, Tom. I think we'll take us now to the company perspective, and we will move over to Lena from Inter-IKEA Group. So, and how are companies acting here? And you can say your own perspective here. What frameworks are you using to align your company's climate transition plan with national plans in global climate trends?
Great, and I'm really glad to be here. In IKEA, our climate plans are grounded in the science of limiting global warming with 1.5 degrees, of course. And we're committed to halving our emissions by 2030 on our road to, of course, net zero in 2050. And our targets and commitments are grounded in the Science-Based Target Initiative net zero standard. But of course, commitments, they're just the starting point. So what we have done is we have broken down this big, huge commitment through our whole entire value chain. So from looking at materials to looking at production, logistics, our own customer meeting points, customer use of our products in their homes. And then each part of these really has their own plans, their own action, their own goals to really make this huge commitment come to life. Because it really requires transformation in the entire value chain for us to make this happen. So we have roadmaps for most of these emissions, and we published it in the first time in 24. We really wanted to show transparently what our plans are, how far we've gotten, and of course where we have dilemmas, where we still need to push forward and have more issues that we face. So in some parts we've come quite far. If you look at production or product use in customer homes, we're far beyond now the 50% goal, which is super nice. And that has of course happened a lot with our move to renewable energy and electricity. So renewable energy is now 52% in our production overall. And I'm really proud to say that 491 suppliers, it's almost half of our suppliers, are on 100% renewable electricity. And if you look at product use at home, it's really looking at the efficiency of products like lighting or electronics, it can be refrigerators, etc. There, we have also gone beyond the 50%. So that means we can make new, more ambitious goals in those areas. If you look at our LED lighting, it's already 35% more efficient than it used to be. So that's really nice. But then we have areas where we still have dilemmas, like materials, which is our by far biggest footprint. It's 52% of our climate footprint. And there we see that our plans do not take us all the way to 50%. So there we have to push for more new innovations to really close the gap of where we are. And we're working in materials with pretty much every lever we can, from all the way from design, making sure we're super efficient with the materials we use. That's really, really important, doing more for less. And then we work on, of course, recycled materials. We know that is also better for the climate. And substituting materials where we can, where the product actually allows for that. So, and then of course, working with innovators and entrepreneurs, trying to see what else can we do. So we know that in the whole transformation that we're doing, we stand for a huge part of that burden. It is up to us, it's our determination, it's our decision making, it's our investments, it's our entrepreneurial spirit that can make it happen. But we also really depend on a broader system and broader system level changes in the world we live in. We can't do it alone. And here we really choose to collaborate, support, and advocate with partners, NGOs, business peers, and of course then policymakers. So for governments, I think one of the important frameworks are really the NDCs, because these national commitments are important to show ambitions and intentions, and to support really investments and incentives to be able to have more sustainable systems. And it can be in everything that we need, like renewable energy and electricity, zero emission, transport infrastructure, or of course transforming into a more circular business with things as seemingly simple as collecting and sorting and recycling infrastructure, things like that. Those are incredibly important for us to be able to make our targets. So if we could get these in place, then of course we can decarbonize faster. And businesses like ours and economies will become more resilient. And I think we will create new job opportunities, and we can create more sustainable growth. So I really believe that IKEA and the private sector has a really big part to play to really support and accelerate these NDCs. They're incredibly important for us. So our approach, as usual, is then to be really constructive, have constructive dialogues with policymakers, and then together with industry peers and civil society. Because no one can do this alone. We have to do it together to have a sort of a win-win for people and planet. I think that is the most important message.
Yeah, and it is, we see very clearly the connection between policy and companies. No one can act without the other. There will be no real progress if we don't align here. But also with when you're talking, Lena, how I love when companies are so very open and transparent with this is going well and this is a challenge. Here we need to work and here we need support and working together. So that's so great to hear. And now going over to you, Rebecca, and thank you for enabling us to have these kinds of discussions, because that's so important. So Unilever opening up its office here for such a panel to have these views. So thank you so much, and your question as well. So what are the biggest barriers that you face in scaling Unilever's climate solutions?
So I think lots of points already covered by the panel, but probably building on what Tom said around financing. I think we've done a lot of work at Unilever. We have a climate transition action plan, so we know where our emissions sit across our value chain. So therefore, we've taken steps. There's always more to do, but the 300 biggest suppliers upstream, we know what we need to do. We're working on individual emissions reduction programs with them. With R&D, we're looking at how do we come up with new innovations that are going to reduce emissions. We're working on regenerative agriculture, on the shift with suppliers. How do we look at things like intercropping? What do we need to do around drip irrigations? And a raft of different things that we're doing. So I think within our own control, we can take the steps, and we've identified what we need to do, and there's a ton of pragmatic programs in place in order for us to ensure that we do that. I think building on what Tom was saying, therefore we need to look at outside of our control, what's the biggest levers, or what are the biggest levers that we can pull. And obviously there's a ton of things that we need to do in the advocacy and policy place, which is where then the NDCs start to come in. Because I think as a private sector company, once you have identified where the emissions sit and what you need to do, you then need to look at, well, what kind of systems change do we need to bring about in order to make that kind of transition. So if I think about shifting to regenerative agriculture, as the private sector, you need to work with government and financiers to say, we will sign offtake agreements, we will shift the way that we are doing our sourcing. If there is financing to help the farmers to make that transition, that's what we want to do. So, for example, we're working on regenerative agriculture programs in North America on soy. We need help for farmers in order to be able to make that transition. So we need to bring in finance. And I think to your point, Tom, the private sector can then help governments to de-risk making that transition. And that's when you then get the flow of capital into making these kind of programs actually viable in the long term. You need to work with regulators. The EU Detergents Act recently is putting into place something that we've been advocating and pushing for a long time from a policy perspective around changing to biotech feedstocks. So really important for us. But again, to make it very granular, when we look at our own emissions, actually for us, if we can work with the Indian government to do that, and that's part of their NDCs, that will have a massive impact because we really know where the emissions sit across our value chain. So I think you need to identify where the emissions sit, work out the scientific, the R&D, the financing solutions that will make that realistic, and then at country level, get very, very specific across the private sector and with governments around reassuring government that the private sector wants to make this transition, to a point, Tom, if the financing is available. And I think bringing all of that together is really, I think, the major unlock. And I think we've seen a bit of a shift from, and I love, I get excited by the 2015, the Paris Agreement, SDGs, and, it's all exciting. But to make it really granular, a shift now to country level advocacy, it's super exciting to think about the COP, everything that's happening in the autumn. Examples from Chile, obviously we'll hear about Brazil in a second, but actually where you can then align private sector and government interests into solutions that will help to grow the economy, bring in finance, that's the unlock. And I think, a lot of the conversation recently, I felt shifted a bit to, it's about risk mitigation, which is, from a financing perspective, very important. We have a lot of questions from investors about future-proofing our supply chain, because the reality and the impact of climate change on nature, particularly for agricultural raw materials, but across all of our sourcing, is very real. So investors want to know and understand. And if you look across a consumer goods company, or in fact many private sector companies, on a corporate risk register, you will see quite a lot that are linked into sustainability. So part of it is around risk mitigation, but I like to try and be positive and optimistic as well, and think, well, actually there are also all the investments that will come with investing in biotech, for example. What does that mean in new jobs? If you think about the shift to regenerative agriculture, actually how does that future-proof farming for the generation of farmers who are coming and who are growing up now? So yeah, I think risk reduction, important, positive impact and growth for the economy, really important, and then aligning private sector and government policy behind country level NDCs, and then bringing in finance.
Right. Yeah, applause. Well said. I think we move over to Marcelo now. Last speaker of this fabulous panel. We may have a quick round at the end. We'll see first. How does the COP30 presidency view corporate action in this space, and where do you see real opportunities for a breakthrough?
Thank you so much for the question, for the kind invitation. Very hard to speak at last, right? Always for everyone. But it's a pleasure to be back in London. I've lived here for 4 years, and to be at Unilever and to be among so many friends, right? From different backgrounds, all those climate reunions, they look like family getting together, right? So it's always very good to connect. For COP30, and to build on everything that has been said here, which for me is really music to my ears, because that's what we're trying to combine and to put together. When Gonzalo and I, we are becoming more than friends, we're becoming brothers, and we were 2 weeks ago in São Paulo, and a university professor, he told us, you should change the name. Instead of Conference of the Parties, it should be Conference of the Whole, because that's what we're talking about, right? We are talking about of the whole of mankind and what the GST will do. The GST, the global stocktake, those are the measures that will bring a global NDC together. So that's the connection between the NDCs. That's what we're trying to align, the stars in COP. And I've been in the private sector for the last 15 years. I'm much younger than those creams really work, so it helps a lot. And what I've always tried to explain and to connect was, as you've mentioned, the 3 different spheres. I think we do have 4 of them. One of them is science, right? So connecting science with public policy, with the missions and the production, and Gonzalo now is at the board of Science-Based Targets, so getting those numbers right and connecting that to finance, making that wheel spin on the right direction, so financing projects that will be able to decarbonize, that will bring the NDCs together, that will allow science to go on the right direction, is where we are. And the pace is the question, how far we are. And I told you I am older than I look. So I remember 1992 when everything started in Brazil at the Rio conference, where COPs were invented. And we were heading to 4 degrees back then, right? So now, if we are discussing if it's 1.7, 2.3, we were in the wrong direction. And we were able to shift the course of direction. Now it's for us to intensify the new course of direction. And what we are proposing for COP30, many new, I wouldn't say any new commitment, because we do have all the commitments already in place. We do have an agreement, which is the Paris Agreement, that sets clearly where we have to go. What we need now is to align the climate initiatives with the nature initiatives. Because one measure can be at the same time climate positive, but not necessarily nature positive. And what we need to do is to bring life back and to regain the soils, and that's the reason for the work on regenerative agriculture. And so what we're envisioning for bioeconomy, and bioeconomy is the area that I'm taking care of. We have different special envoys. We have special envoys for areas of the world, so 10 for each region. We have for specific sectors like agriculture, like industry, private sector, and we have for themes. And I have the honor to bring the theme on bioeconomy. And I think we have 5 big layers on this theme to work on. The first one is what the world really wants to hear from Brazil, which is how can we conserve nature? And what is the strategy for not only the rainforest, the biggest biome on Earth, and we have 332 biomes on Earth. The Amazonian one is crucial for the success of the Paris Agreement. So there is no Paris Agreement without the Amazon, there is no Amazon without the Paris Agreement. So North and South must work together to reach the conditions in which we will decarbonize and we will keep nature standing. So the first one, there is this whole idea on creating what is called, and we should rebrand, we need to rebrand it. It's called TFFF. I know, too many acronyms. So, but it's the Tropical Forever Facility Fund. So this idea will allow tropical forests in South America, Southeast Asia, Africa as a whole, to receive resources to keep the forest standing. So this is crucial. Second layer is being mentioned a few times, and I have the privilege to be with WBCSD, who's leading one of the initiatives on regenerative agriculture called LAB in one of the threatened biomes that Unilever is part of, which is the Cerrado region, where we're able to put an initiative that you have conversion-free, zero deforestation policies, producing more in more effective way combining crops, cattle and forests. So this already gave great results. We need finance to step in and to allow this to flourish on a new way. So agriculture will play a major agenda on COP because Brazil is a powerhouse for, at the same time, protection, but also production. We have a world to feed, 9 billion people. They must have fresh and new element and new ingredients and to eat better. Third one is social bioeconomy, how we learn to work with traditional communities. And we need to change the way we see them. Nowadays we see them as poor people who live in the forest, which is incorrect. They are the guardians of 80% of biodiversity on Earth. We owe our lives to them, and they must be compensated for that in a proper way. So we need to work with them correctly and bring this into another level of discussion. The fourth one is bringing forests back. And we do need, only in Brazil, we have 168 million hectares to recover. Gonzalo was part of the plan for Riyadh, the desertification COP, in which the global number came out of 1.5 billion hectares to be restored. So new initiatives are needed for that, and COP will help those to thrive. And finally, biotech. Everything that we are talking here needs technology, AI. Brazil has a lot of expertise on renewables. Our cars have been running on alcohol for over 40 years, and biofuels will play a major role in the transition for aviation, maritime freight, so we can reach the global stocktake targets, and this will be a must. Just to wrap up, I always talk too much, but this is important. We need to get carbon markets in the right space, and we need to find a way to bring to farmers the resources they need to shift to regenerative agriculture. So this will be a must to reorganize the voluntary carbon market, work on interoperability between that and the regulated one, and connected regulated carbon markets in a way that we can create a coalition of the willing. So as Gonzalo said, China has a major need to decarbonize and will need carbon credits, and maybe the revolution on agriculture can come from those connections. So Canada, UK, China, those countries who are willing to go in that direction, that will be the way that we are trying to connect the dots on COP30. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And we're actually out of time, but someone said we could have some minutes. So I have a really quick question. So if it's like a word answer or a sentence answer, and that's what positive development in your field or outside are you most excited about? I can start with you, Gonzalo.
So I'm here sitting with 4 incredible companies. I'm sorry that I referred to your century working in Natura, right? So it's a centurion person. So IKEA, Viva, Natura, Unilever, and I can recognize the leadership, the long-term vision, how they are accounting in a different way, and so definitely, and they are understanding the pre-competitive agreements as a general advantages, right? So that I'm excited about how companies like the 4 represented here can really show a possibility that unfortunately not every company in the world is already understanding, and how much they actually contribute to the moment of the world where this is no longer the moment when the changes that we require are going to be driven by the multilateralism. It's the moment for companies and for the private sector to support multilateralism by bringing these examples there in a very strong, measurable way.
Thank you. Rebecca?
So we're going to say a really micro thing, Wonder Wash. It's a quick wash detergent that we launched a couple of months ago to help particularly urban consumers who actually realise they don't need to wash their clothes for hours on end, they only need a 15-minute wash. But the reason I mention it is because I think it brings sustainability into real time, real world for everyday people. So it's less energy, it's less water, it's recyclable packaging, and therefore it's costing the consumer less, but it's helping make a positive contribution to the planet. And I think the easier that we can make sustainability, but actually providing high quality products, so you're not compromising anything, in fact you're enhancing the offering, I think the easier it will be to embed sustainability commonplace and make it part of our economies day to day.
Very practical, thank you.
my optimistic view, I am optimistic by nature, but it's my perspective is we need to move from carbon emissions to carbon emotions. We need to understand what we are referring to. People should get an understanding on how they are playing a part of it. As the CEO of COP30 and Antonio always stands, if you're not part of the solution, maybe you are part of the problem. So getting to know where you are, what you're doing with your life, your consumer habits, and your choices as an individual, as a citizen, it will be really important for the future to be brighter. So that's my goal.
I'm hugely encouraged by the leadership that Brazil's showing this year and the way that they're going about it. They're emphasizing, exactly as we heard, not new commitments, implementation of what we've already agreed. And we saw that last week in the announcement of the action agenda, which brings all of business into the forum. The 30 targets there are the ones that countries have already agreed. So that basically let's take what we've agreed, let's implement that, and as we go, the brightest minds, technological shifts, money, policy will all come together, and that's how we get this done.
Lena?
Yeah, it's probably not a new development, but I have to say it anyway because it's always what gets me most exciting. It is the entrepreneurial spirit of people. So humans doing sort of the impossible possible, right? It's everything from small advancements. I mean, at our company, there was one time when we said 15% reduction in the very, very, very beginning, and everyone said it can't happen. Now we're way beyond that, right? Whenever you put a target, there's someone out there who sort of says, don't tell me you can't do it. And there's an innovation, there's a transformation, there's a technical something, you know? If we look back just 10 years, we have come so far, and that gives me, whenever I see it, how big or small, it gives me such hope, and that's what gives me excitement.
Thank you. So this was it for this session. We will have a little bit of a break, and then there will be another exciting session. We have Lena, Tom, Marcelo, Rebecca, and Gonzalo, and a big applause for this fantastic panel.